Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. My name is Diego Rey. I'm the Employment and Labor Market Specialist at the ILO Office for the Caribbean. I welcome you to this 7th virtual roundtable organized by the ILO on saving jobs, creating new ones, and making people more employable, shaping good labor market policies for post-COVID-19 response. We are today up for a very rich and multi-dimensional event. To officially start it, let me give the floor to Mr. Lars Johansen, the Director ad interim of the ILO Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean. Lars?
Thank you, Diego, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, to all of you, and thank you for attending this seventh webinar or virtual roundtable, as we call them, which the ILO Decent Work Team and the Office for the Caribbean has organized since the COVID-19 crisis started in this region, I would say back in March. Today's discussion attempts to dig into and provide some answers and operational guidelines for the design and implementation of labor market measures that may help countries and their citizens to dampen the impact of the crisis on workers and businesses. Since the beginning of the crisis across the world and in the Caribbean specifically, countries have implemented a vast array of responsive measures, from the paramount and basic health-related ones to the ones aimed at ensuring that the subsistence of their citizens during the period of lockdown and closure of business and workplaces, which we have seen over the last few months. Labor markets have also therefore been a staple ingredient in the stimulus packages, but their design, coverage and budgets is varied and hinges on three key elements: the national legislation, the degree and shape of collective bargaining processes and institutions, and finally, the capacity of the various countries to implement. What we aim to do this morning is to dig a bit further into specific aspects of labor market policies and, as a result, provide suggestions for a refined country-level response. Notwithstanding the quickly applied and structured policies in most countries of this region, questions may remain, perhaps not in terms of what to do, but rather how to do it. Referring to the guiding framework of the international labor standards and lessons learned from previous crises and from the rest of the world, today's presenters will share insights about how to cope with termination of employment, work sharing agreements, utilization of leave, and more traditional labor market policies aimed at supporting job seekers. While the roundtable will be as comprehensive as possible, it cannot, for the obvious reasons of limited time that we have to our disposal, be exhaustive. In case of pending questions, we encourage our constituents to reach out to us, and we will then provide further information or agree on how to design a plan for assistance. So with this, I will just end here and wish you all an interesting and productive session. I will now leave the floor to my colleagues from the ILO Decent Work Team and Office for the Caribbean, Diego Rey and Shingo Miyake, and from the Geneva headquarters, Najati Goshe and Giovanni Matozzi. Thank you very much and have a good session.
Thank you very much, Lars. Now, before giving the floor to my colleagues, I wish to remind everybody how this roundtable is structured. We will have two parts with a Q&A session referring to the first set of presentations between them. For both the first and the second presentation, the audience is invited to submit questions over the chat box and panelists will reply. Unfortunately, not all the questions will be answered for reasons of time, and some may be clustered around certain topics. Only the panelists can see your questions. I now invite to the virtual podium my colleague Shingo Miyake, the International Labour Standards Specialist for the ILO Office for the Caribbean, and Giovanni Matozzi, who will be presenting on job retention. They will be joined by Mr. Najati Ghosh, the legal officer from the ILO headquarters in Geneva who will present on new work modalities. Shingo.
Thank you, Diego. Good day to you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to be with you again. And today, as Mr. Johansson has presented, we are dealing with a number of measures, but largely they are grouped into two. And first, we are tackling with the first group related to job retention. So including how to handle termination and also new work modalities and support to enterprises and leave. So let us start. Next slide, please. Are you hearing me, everybody?
Yes, Shingo, we can hear.
Okay.
We're gonna go ahead with the slides.
Yes. Could I have the next slide, please? Great. So we shall start with yes. Thank you for all the yes comments. I appreciate it. It's good to have responses, especially in the morning. Let us start with two instruments that, in fact, we briefly discussed at the last webinar on the 3rd of June. They are conventions and recommendations related to termination. But today we're going to focus on just one point. One point that the employer would have to contemplate when mass termination, mass dismissal is planned for economic and operational reasons. That is, employers have to consult with workers' representatives on measures to avert or minimize terminations. That's the requirement under Convention 158, and Recommendation 166 recommends the following. Temporary reduction of normal hours of work with partial compensation for loss of wages. So work share, in simply put, work sharing. By distributing a shorter hours of work among colleagues, everybody gets to keep their job, but with less salaries naturally because they work less. So that's why there has to be a partial compensation for loss of wages for the normal hours that's not worked. So that's a recommendation. Another recommended solution is spreading the workforce reduction over a certain period of time so that natural reduction will come into play and does the job partially. A reduction of hiring. So let's stay with the current employees, and internal transfer, which is less affected by whatever the issue employer is facing, and training and retraining so that workers can work in new area while keeping the employment, or they may have to leave their job, but they will have a better prospect of rehiring by a new company. Voluntary early retirement with pay. Well, that's a common measure. And restriction of overtime. So that's exercising more control over money spent on overtime. So these are the specific recommendations under 166. And in the following slide, I'm going to invite our specialist from Geneva headquarters, Nudge, to talk about some specific work arrangements. Nudge, please.
Yes, good morning. I hope you can hear me. Yes, in order to better understand the forms of work that were proposed that would be used and have been used under the COVID crisis situation. I think it's important to understand the building blocks, and in this case, the building blocks for the policies such as telework and work sharing are to look at different components of how working time and rest periods are defined. So in the first instance, one of the factors that needs to be taken into account are normal hours of work. And these are the hours of work that which the workers are at the disposal of the employer. And this doesn't include rest periods, so it doesn't normally include lunch or anything like that. And these hours can be set by the day or the week. So as a simple example, most people are familiar with a 9 to 5 work day. Those would be considered normal hours. Overtime are all hours in excess of the normal working hours. These can be limited by day and by week. So again, if we use the example just above, the normal workday is 9 to 5. Then if a worker works until 6, that extra hour is considered an overtime hour. Now, when you put these two together, we get what's called maximum working hours. So normal hours plus overtime hours equals maximum hours. Now you can have maximum hours by day or by week. And this is meant to set certain boundaries in terms of the number of hours that a worker will be working during any given day or any week. Now, the other thing, these are important considerations in the determination of the working hours, but also we need to factor in the issue of rest periods. Now, rest periods can be, as you can see, can be defined there are several different types of rest periods. We have a workday rest break. These are organized as a pause. So this would be like a meal break, a coffee break, a tea break, and they're meant to break the working day down so workers can have a break. And actually, we found research indicates that workers tend to be more productive if they're given certain periods throughout the workday to recuperate. Daily rest is the period at the end of the workday. So if we're talking about a 9 to 5 workday, the daily rest would begin after 5 o'clock and continue until just before 9 o'clock in the morning. In essence, if you work during the day, daily rest would be the period at night where you go home, go to sleep, see your family, have dinner, things like that. Weekly rest refers to, in essence, what many people would refer to as the weekend. But for some workers, it may not be a 48-hour or 2-day period, but it should at least be a minimum of 24 hours or a 1-day period during a 7-day work week period. Finally, we also have annual leave, which is the yearly vacation or holiday consisting of a number of consecutive days or weeks off. In some countries, this is a paid leave. Could I have the next slide, please? Now, these are important.
Nudge,
yes.
sorry. Before you move on, let me just jump in here.
Sure.
Because we receive a question about clarification or terminology, and since this question relates to what Nudge is going to present, I'd like to jump in. Excuse me, Nudge.
No worries.
Yeah. The question is about. In fact, Avalon, could I go back to 2 slides, please? To my slide on the convention and the recommendation. The question relates, one more please. The question relates to what do you mean by partial compensation? It is the first recommended measure under 166, recommendation 166. It's not a requirement under the convention, but it's a recommendation. Partial compensation is a compensation paid often by the government. Government has a separate fund for it, and because workers under the scheme would work less, because work is shared among different colleagues so that they can keep the employment, they work less. So government funds comes into play and then compensate partially. They pay their salaries partially so that with the salary they get from the employers, with the compensation paid from the government's fund, they get for instance, 60 or 80% of the normal salary they get. So that's what it means by partial compensation. It's a additional supplementary payment by the government fund for this purpose. And this is important. This is an important point when Nudge explains work sharing. So other question, this is a special case because this is a question about terminology. Other questions will be handled during the Q&A session. Sorry, Nudge, please continue.
No worries. Okay. One of the other one of the mechanisms that has been widely used, mainly in the mainly by people who are whose the nature of their work, generally service sector work, can work from home or work from a distance. They don't have to come to the workplace. Some of you are familiar. It's called Telework. Telework is done at a distance from the employer's premises. You use information and communication technology. This means computers, mobile phones, tablets, things of that nature, or landline telephones occasionally to carry out the work. It often involves the use of the internet. There are positives and negatives to this. Workers find that the use of telework reduces commuting time. Of course, there's no commute. You're connected to the office, but you're not traveling to the office. It offers some flexibility in terms of not the number of hours that you work, but the timing of those hours. So you may agree, you may have an agreement with the employer that you're available or you're contactable at certain times, but at other times you might be able to work at a different time period than you would otherwise do if you were in the employer's workspace. Workers find that that it can provide a better work-life balance. Enterprises have found that it can raise productivity. There are some studies now coming out examining how telework is being used during the crisis, and it's finding that in many cases this is workers have found, many workers have found that it's they're able to do more. It also, from an enterprise perspective, reduces the need for office space, and there are companies that have been talking about have realized that telework may actually work for them if it's properly structured, and it reduces the need to have office space, to rent space in places that, especially in places where office rental space may be quite high. But the problem with, there are disadvantages to telework. It can blur the lines between work and personal life. If you are always at your computer, you never quite know. Sometimes the workday will blend one into the other. It's very possible that you could end up working longer hours and more intense hours, meaning that the longer hours, of course, is clear. People are working perhaps beyond normal hours into overtime. But it also may mean work intensification, and work intensification means that you are being asked to do many more things at any given time, and the demands on the demands of the work that you have to do may be more intense. Workers can also feel isolated and neglected if the communication, if there's no communication properly established between the worker and the enterprise. So it is important to structure these policies in a way that kind of that takes some of these issues into account. And as I said before, you know, it's important to include normal working hours, overtime, and rest periods. Just because the worker is not in the workplace does not mean that these conditions don't apply. They actually do apply. Now, there are a number of countries that have created national policies and regulatory measures. It's been found in collective agreements, strategies that promote a framework for telework and how it can be used. These are growing as we speak as a result of the crisis. So while telework has been used to some extent, not as a core working condition, it has grown immensely during the COVID period, and we're looking to see how to get a grip with that. The next slide is about work sharing. And Shingo has touched on a number of the different issues, but I'm going to give you a few more details about work sharing. So work sharing is the reduction of working time, and it's intended to spread a reduced volume of work over the same or similar number of workers in order to avoid layoffs. This is a key factor. It's an attempt to preserve the jobs by reducing basically working hours so that workers can retain their employment. And there are 5 elements to these programs: the reduction of working hours for all workers in a company or specific unit in lieu of layoffs. The reduction of working hours may include a pro rata reduction in wages and salaries. So the focus is on a pro rata reduction. It's not just sort of a slice, but it's in proportion to the number of hours that may be reduced. It's also based on the idea of a wage supplement provided by the government to affected workers to limit the impact of a temporary reduction of working hours. So in essence, it can be viewed as something of a top-up on so for example, if the employer has to pay a percentage less, the government will provide a certain amount more to kind of cushion the blow, if you will, of the workers earning less. The establishment of a work sharing policy has to operate within a certain time frame. So the government will say that this is a policy that we will operate for the course of 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, a year. It's not necessarily a permanent policy. It is simply meant to address a crisis situation and to preserve enterprises and employment. Links have also been made between work sharing and training or retraining activities. So the idea is also, as workers may be working less, they may have an opportunity to upskill with the enterprise or the employer they currently work for, which perhaps may lead to productivity gains when economic conditions get better, or they retrain in a slightly different area, and if the job market changes, they're at least skilled to perhaps either stay with the firm or perhaps go somewhere else. The advantages is that companies can adjust working hours to meet changing demand. In crisis situations, such as in 2008, companies were trying to adjust their demand as quickly as they possibly could. And this gives a certain flexibility to address those concerns. It's also about the retention of skilled workers and reducing recruitment costs. This is really important for employers. When you lose workers, and even if you keep your enterprise, if you lose skilled workers, there's a big opportunity and financial cost to training and recruiting new workers. So the objective of work sharing is to ensure that you keep the workers who you've trained, who you have a relationship, who know your business, and who can adapt very quickly. It provides job security for workers. It protects income. It's not perfect, but it protects at least a large part of their income, as opposed to being unemployed, where a lot would depend on if there's unemployment insurance and to what extent that insurance is available. The disadvantages is that companies need to adjust their human resource policy to manage this system. They need to engage, there will be bureaucratic engagement, of course, with governments in order to secure, to become part of any kind of economic measures that the government may have available. So there may be administrative costs to changing the work organization. There may be certain calculations that may need to be addressed. There may be issues relating to social insurance and things of that nature. Of course, there's a reduction in wage earnings for workers, and this can lead to worker morale problems. So these are some of the key issues and advantages and disadvantages, and I'll hand over to my colleague, Giovanni, to continue.
Thank you a lot, Naj. So yeah, I'm gonna talk now about the policies that have been, the country policy responses that have been applied during the COVID crisis. So, I mean, during the crisis, we saw that mobility restrictions worldwide have affected industries and sectors asymmetrically, with some experiencing partial closures or even total suspension of production. Given the dimension of the crisis, governments have rapidly adopted measures to sustain firms financially and also to avoid layoffs. These measures have often been targeting the most affected sectors and also small and medium enterprises, even micro enterprises. According to the ILO monitoring, in fact, employment in sectors most at risk is strongly concentrated in firms with less than 10 employees. So we can distinguish three main kinds of measures that were implemented. The first kind is related to the deferral of taxes and payments. In many countries, deferrals involved income and corporate taxes, value-added taxes, but also social security payments and debt payments. In some cases, deferrals have been linked to some job retention obligation for the employers. Just to cite a couple of examples from the Caribbean, in the Barbados, employers retaining 75% of their staff could defer employment contribution, while in Dominica, a corporate income tax rebate of 8% was given to employers retaining at least 80% of the staff for 12 months. The second kind of measures that were largely applied were those related to the provision of liquidity to the firms. And in this sense, governments have stepped in several ways. Firstly, they relied on loan guarantees by creating new schemes. Like in Japan, for example, a specific scheme for small and medium enterprises was created. Or also they increased the funds or the level of the guarantees. In Germany, for example, the amount of public guarantee was doubled to 2.5 billion, and the level was raised up to 100% for certain kinds of loans. These public guarantees were often linked with direct lending schemes, and moreover, some countries also relied on direct grants or subsidies, like in Belgium, where both the federal government and the regional governments are providing lump sum transfers to certain kind of enterprises. These kind of measures in general were not linked to job retention mechanisms. In this case, the idea was to provide liquidity relief to firms, avoiding failures and thus indirectly avoiding layoff. The last kind of measures that were applied was those related to temporary wage subsidies. And in this case, governments directly paid or subsidized wages of workers in affected firms. Also here we saw some trends. We saw countries implementing new schemes like Canada or the UK, where a new scheme was implemented, the job retention scheme. And also we saw countries that had already these schemes in place, but implemented new measures in order to adapt them to the COVID crisis. In general, this measure aimed to relax eligibility criteria and enlarging coverage. In Italy, for example, also micro enterprises could apply to the scheme, while in Netherlands, also temporary workers could receive the subsidy. And to conclude, I would like to raise just one point, because for what we have seen in advanced and emerging countries, these three kind of measures have been implemented in a complementary way. By contrary, in the number of countries in low and in the lower middle income group announcing measures to sustain liquidity has been much higher than those providing wage subsidy. And this could reveal a sort of institutional capacity to implement such schemes, also because these schemes are quite costly. But I mean, we should use more these kind of schemes, also because sometimes these schemes are also linked to some training mechanisms in order to upskill and reskill the employees. And now I finished, and I leave the word to Shingo.
Thank you, Gianni. Now you are already seeing my screen. Now we are moving to the next topic on leave, leave during the COVID-19 crisis. And international labor standards, or ILO conventions and recommendations, provide some guidance on some questions related to leave. And we are going to discuss 4 of them now. The first one is, can a worker be required to use his or her paid holidays? And Convention 132 provides the guideline. What does it say? The guidance is that employers should not unilaterally require workers to use their annual paid holiday. It's true that the convention, the timing of workers' paid leave must be determined by the employers, but they do so after consultation with the worker concerned, taking into considerations such as work requirements, how much work is there, and then the timing. You know, if the employer takes the holiday now, would he or she be able to take rest and appropriate timing and for the appropriate duration, or should it be later? Should it be afterwards? Should it be earlier? So those things need to be considered by the employers, but after consultation with the worker concerned. So that is why the guidance says not unilaterally. Employers can decide, but not unilaterally. And the committee of experts of the ILO, the legal experts, emphasize this point. Well, the purpose of holidays is about giving workers a minimum period of rest and leisure. And that purpose is best attained when leave is granted at the time which suits the worker. So the decision is in the hand of employer, but the decision have to be made to the maximum extent, considering the worker's welfare. So that is the guidance on the first point. Second point is that are workers entitled to paid sick leave? Convention 102 and 130 are relevant on this point. These conventions say that they should be entitled to sick leave or sickness benefits as long as they are incapacitated to work. So that's the guidance on paid sick leave. Next slide, please. And the third point is absences from work for quarantine. How should it be handled? Well, the worker and the recommendation 134 gives the guidance. Workers who are absent from work for preventive and curative medical care, so that includes quarantine, and the worker's salary is suspended, then the worker should be granted a sickness cash benefit or sickness cash benefit for that. And also, what if a member of a family is sick? Not the worker himself or herself, but the family member is sick. How should that be treated? Recommendation 165 and 134 are relevant. 1, it should be possible for a worker with family responsibilities to take leave for dependent child or another member of worker's immediate family who requires care. So care leave should be available for such workers. These recommendations also emphasized that special needs of workers, including those arising from family responsibilities, should be taken into account in preparing shift work arrangements and assignment to night work. So not only care leave, but when the work is planned for such worker, then their shift and their assignment to night work should be crafted in such a way that they can attend to their family. So these are the principles and guidance from relevant conventions and recommendations. Now I'm handing over back to Gianni, and he's going to explain some national measures implementing these guidance.
Yes, thank you, Shingo. So as Shingo was saying before, according to the international labor standards, an employer should not unilaterally require workers to use annual leave. But it can happen that during moment of crisis, both workers and employers could find an agreement. Basically, that's what happened in Denmark during the COVID crisis. In fact, on March 2020, a tripartite agreement on temporary wage subsidies between the government, trade unions, and employers association was established. According to the agreement, the government agreed to pay the wages of the affected enterprises, and the employers agreed in retaining workers. On the other side, social parties, workers accepted to use a part of their annual leave. And more in the specific, it was agreed that the employee must take holiday or time off in lieu amounting to a total of 5 days. And if the employee had not holiday or time off in lieu, he must take leave without pay or taking holidays from the next holiday year. Secondly, during the crisis, we have also saw several countries taking measures regarding sick leave and quarantine. Some countries extended sick leave coverage and tried to include the period of quarantine in it. Others instead introduced special sick and quarantine leaves. In the US, for example, before COVID, there was not a statutory obligation for employers to pay sick workers. During COVID, instead, with the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, 2 weeks of paid sick leave for workers affected by COVID were introduced. In this case, the leave is paid at the employee regular rate pay, and it is directly paid by the employers who will be reimbursed later. Next slide, please. Yeah, regarding special quarantine leave instead, a nice example in this case is Malta, that introduced a specific leave for workers legally obliged to abide to a quarantine order. Also in this case, the leave is paid by the employer that can ask a partial reimbursement of 350 euros. The leave also covers self-employed workers because also self-employed workers are eligible for the reimbursement. Moreover, we also saw governments implementing rules on carers and parental leaves in order to meet the need of workers that had to care of a sick relative or taking care about their children. In Australia, for example, full-time and part-time workers were entitled to 10 days of paid care leave. And if they have no days left, they can take unpaid leave. The leave in this case also covers casual workers that are entitled of 2 days of unpaid leave per occasion. And of course, workers, in order to get the leave, they must give a reasonable evidence to the employer. Finally, instead, next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Also, several measures regarding parental leave have been taken worldwide. An example could be the Italian case. In fact, the Italian government introduced 15 days, 15 days of special parental leave for workers with children. And more in the specific, parents with children below 12 could access to a leave paid at 50% of the salary, while parents with children between 12 and 16 could opt for unpaid leave. And in this case, these kind of leave are not deducted from the annual leave count. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the colleagues. So we went over some different topics and some country examples, and in the meantime we received some questions. We now open the floor about these one big but multi-topic presentation to anybody. We will also start by answering the question that we received in the meantime. So the first ones I'm gonna call my colleague Najat. You refer to something like what is the version of work sharing agreements for countries with limited fiscal space? What could be the options in that case? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Diego. I think that in certainly the countries that have been the most advanced in terms of using work sharing have been industrialized countries. And to give you a better idea, the country that created and innovated the work sharing method and work sharing schemes was Germany. And they've been doing it since 1929. So they have vast experience in terms of doing this. Now, the issue is, and when this crisis, certainly in 2008, there were, when the economic crisis hit, many industrialized countries used a similar kind of method to the German method, although not exactly the same. And of course, now with COVID, there have been many industrialized countries have used these mechanisms. Now, it of course requires an immense amount of it's required a lot of a fiscal policy to be engaged. Governments have had to spend enormous amounts of money to try and provide the guarantees. I think if in countries where the fiscal policies are very limited, then the policies I think need to be work sharing needs to be part of a greater package of policy measures. So, for example, I think that there are questions about that the governments may need to address questions such as rental forbearance, delaying of rental payments for businesses, delaying in some cases perhaps tax obligations that may be required during a certain period of time. There may be other sort of measures that may be required, and work sharing would then be a part of that, because the idea is to try and make sure that these enterprises in the first instance that viable enterprises continue to structure well and continue to operate in a viable manner. But also to ensure that we can keep workers working, that we can keep people employed, and that they can continue in their jobs until hopefully this unexpected situation lifts, and we can proceed to quote unquote perhaps the term being used now is a new normal. there are examples of some developing countries. We published a book after the 2008 crisis. I co-authored a book with a colleague in my unit, John Messenger. We explored work sharing methods, and there were countries such as Turkey and Uruguay that had adapted certain measures that could be broadly considered as work sharing. So it is possible for countries with more limited resources. You don't have to be Germany or France or Switzerland to run policies of this nature. Yeah, we do have examples, and I think this is something that we're working on adapting and working to see how we can tailor these measures to meet worker and employer needs.
Thank you, Nash. I have another question for you, which I guess refers to something you said about telework. By accounting for normal working hours, do you mean the employee is obliged to keep a formal log that will be shared with the employer?
It's certainly possible to do it that way. Although I think the position that we would recommend would be something along the lines of having an agreement sort of upfront between the worker and the employer as to when a worker might be available, sort of core hours. So say the worker is available from 9 until 12 and maybe from 2 until 4. But there is some variation as to when they might be reachable. That's just an example. I mean, it can be done in certainly in different ways. I think that the real concern that many employers have around the world, and one of the issues with telework, has been employers, I think, sometimes if they can't see what a worker is doing, they're concerned about whether, to what extent the worker is actually doing the work. And I think that contributes sometimes to a bit of intensification of work. It contributes to more work tasks, more that needs to be accomplished during the working hours. But I think certainly, the question that was posed, it is possible to do it that way, to have an agreement where the worker perhaps accounts for a certain number of hours that they've been working, and that's agreed with the employer. But I think it's better if these things are agreed up front in the early stages of the arrangement, of the agreement, and then are perhaps adapted as you go along. It's not to say that you propose something and that's written in stone. It's to say that we have a basic framework. It's a little bit elastic to start with, and then we work with it to try and find the best way to have productive, but also a decent kind of working hours.
Thank you, Nash. I'm going to move to my colleague Shingo. There are a couple of questions about international labor standards. First is, could you expand on what is meant by a sickness cash benefit based on recommendation 134, and who would be responsible for this payment, the employer or the government?
The sickness benefits are usually covered by the insurance. I believe it's although usually employers can contribute to it. Even workers as well. Usually a portion of there's certain percentage fixed that's different by each country, but they contribute to the Social Security fund, and out of that fund, sickness benefit is paid. So the formula for calculation is different from one country to another.
Thank you, Shingo. The other one is organizations were given guidance and safety measures to follow in preparation for the return to work. If the worker returns to work but contracts COVID-19, etc., who would be responsible for the follow-up care of the worker?
Well, the worker is sick, so again, the worker should be entitled to sick leave, and then it's paid. It's you know, we just talked about it through the usually by the Social Security, to which employers and workers contribute. But if multiple employees seems to have contracted COVID, and then if it was detected that that workplace is the reason, then employers has to act on their general obligation to provide a safe working environment. So whatever measures like sanitation, installing protective equipment, distributing protective gears to employees, cooperating with investigation by the health authorities and so forth. Those will be additional practical responsibilities of the employers.
Thank you, Shingo. There was a question which I will turn to Giovanni about specific examples of countries with schemes for temporary wage subsidies. You mentioned some, but maybe you can elaborate on them.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Diego. So, I mean, two nice examples are the Corona Job Retention Scheme in the United Kingdom and the emergency wage subsidy in Canada. So concerning the United Kingdom, the wage, I mean, the temporary wage subsidy scheme was introduced in April, and initially was it was considered to last only for 3 months, but now it has been prolonged until October. So basically, employers can claim around 80% of the usual monthly wage costs, up to 2,500 pounds a month. And in this case, this scheme has been thought in order to retain, I mean, avoiding layoff from the beginning. On the contrary, the emergency wage subsidy in Canada, it has been sorry. Sorry, I had a problem with my headphone. So I was saying the emergency wage subsidy in Canada has been thought with a different scope because the wage subsidy is given in order to rehire workers that were previously laid off due to COVID. And in this case, the amount of subsidy is around 75% of the employee wages.
Thank you, Giovanni. We have one last question, and I will just invite the audience to stop. We need to move forward to the next part of this webinar to stop with the questions. So I will maybe turn it to Shingo or Naj, if you have any comment on this. It refers to the hotel sector in the Caribbean, where it happened that everyone was already had already received vacation first, and then layoff began until further notice. So the question is, when the hospitality industry reopens, will staff be able to flex the privileges outlined in this presentation? Any idea about this?
Yeah. I think in the case the hotel industry in the Caribbean, and I mean, is experiencing, I think, what the hotel industry sort of globally is experiencing, tourism in general is experiencing. Obviously, people are just not coming. So the question is, I think, in the first instance in the Caribbean, it sounded as though workers were given a sort of temporary period away from work, and as this is kind of developed, the question is, what then? How do we address these situations? I think one thing I kind of wanted to go back to, just with regard to the work sharing policies. I mentioned that there's the sort of fiscal element, and that work sharing should be part of a sort of a holistic approach to addressing this sort of employment, also kind of employment crisis, if you will. But I think one other dimension to bear in mind, and this is something that I think one of the reasons why I say it needs to be a holistic approach, is that in many industrialized countries, the central banks are getting involved in buying a lot of corporate debt. And for this doesn't affect smaller or medium-sized enterprises. For the most part, it'll affect larger enterprises. But for larger enterprises in the Caribbean, this might be an important measure to get liquidity into these companies, because I think the main issue that we're talking about is that we have a supply and a demand sort of imbalance. And at the moment, what I think governments and the social partners are looking for is to find ways to get liquidity into viable enterprises, to ensure that these enterprises can stay in business and continue to provide work in the future. But to get through this sort of crisis situation, and the best mechanism to do that. So as I say, I think it's not just there's certainly a labor component with regard to wages and hours. There's a fiscal component coming from the parliaments and the governments. There's perhaps a monetary element in which the central banks contribute to ensuring liquidity in the market and liquidity to companies. These are all measures meant to keep the sort of flow of money kind of going within the system, to keep these enterprises going. And they have to, I think, where the resources are more limited, particularly in the fiscal context and in the government context, these packages have to, the approach has to be almost in a larger scale, it has to be holistic and more broad, incorporating many social actors and many different actors within the country. I'll pause there.
Now, this is Shinka. Was there any case of work sharing applied to a hotel sector? Are you aware?
The thing is it's usually work sharing policies are administered on a request basis. So what happens is the government initiates a policy. It announces that there's a system where you have a work sharing system established within some government administrative unit. And the enterprises who need this support will go to that unit and put their application in to get these resources. This has there have been variations on that in different countries, and different countries have different experiences, but more or less that's the architecture, the infrastructure that's used. And normally the infrastructure where the applications go is to either a small business administration function or through social insurance such as unemployment insurance. And it's through these mechanisms that the applications go, and then you have the process is then initiated. It's not necessarily a sectoral approach. It tends to be either by the enterprise, the owner of the enterprise being required to put in an application, or in some cases, the worker is required to put in perhaps, for example, if they're using social insurance.
So a hotel, I mean, a specific individual hotel could submit the application then.
Yes, if the policy is structured so that it's the enterprise that makes the request, then yes, an individual hotel, in principle, could apply to a government administered system to see if they could get perhaps loans or some type of. In the first instance, in real terms, what we've seen sort of globally, and again, this is coming very quickly. It's information that we're receiving sort of almost on an hourly basis. So it's going to take some time to digest. There are questions about whether upfront loans are more important, or whether tax rebates are important, or which system works. In some places it might be one system, in others it might be another, and some it's a combination. So it's about creating the infrastructure that allows for the delivery of these resources to, for example, a small hotel, that then allows the hotel to retain their employees until hopefully business then picks up, and then the hotel can then compete on its own terms.
Okay, thanks, Nudge. We need to move on.
Sure.
But just on the last question, one of my colleagues mentioned that there is an informal work sharing arrangement in St. Martin after Hurricane Irma in 2017. What happened was that the employers and workers agreed, without the intervention from the government. They agreed on work sharing arrangement. So that's another way to go, which I assume at the enterprise level. But okay. Okay, so let us now move on to the part 2 on helping jobless and labor market policies. And for that, I thank you, Diego, first for facilitating part 1. And let us remind ourselves again that just like part 1, we will have a set of presentation by Diego and also Giovanni. And after that, we will receive, in the meantime, you can enter your questions in the chat section and we will deal with them after the presentations. Okay, now Diego, over to you.
Thank you very much, Shingo. We are about 15 minutes late. We started a bit late also. I'll try to make up the time. So I'm going to speak about labor market policies in the times of COVID, and Giovanni will present some concrete examples of what countries have been doing. Now, just a semantic note, labor market policies can be defined as regulative policies that influence labor supply and demand and their interaction. If we take that definition, of course, it's broad and encompassing, and depending probably who you speak to, it could include different elements and different interventions and practices and legislation. Today, in this part, in part 1, we focused on the retention of workers and what can be done about that. And in part 2, we're going to focus on the reintegration of jobless workers with some reference to income replacement and also to services to employers as a way to stimulate the demand. It's labor market policies may be way more than that, but today the focus is narrow. What we want to emphasize and what will emerge throughout my presentations is that labor market policies are not a silver bullet. They will not solve the problem of unemployment or people being out of the labor force. They must be part of a systemic approach together with other policies, and the ultimate goal of that is always to achieve decent, productive, and freely chosen employment. Before moving forward, I also wanted to highlight something about the timing of these measures on reintegrations of jobless workers. What we have seen happening since the outbreak of the COVID crisis is countries focused on providing income support mostly. The attention to reintegration of workers who had been laid off started a bit later, if you want, and the reason is number one, there was uncertainty and overall low labor demand, and number two, part of these answers or measures needed some organization, and so there were some delays to organize some adequate response. Next slide, please. Now, previous, yes. Now, no matter what shape we want to adopt for reintegrating workers, what kind of measures we want to put in place, there are two starting points. The first one is defining roles and responsibilities. Labor market policies in general, but even more so in these times, need to be a multi-stakeholder undertaking. Under the lead of Ministers of Labor, but for sure Minister of Education must be fully involved. NIS, I'm mentioning NIS because in the Caribbean is NIS or social insurance scheme in general, who are currently and mostly in charge of managing the stimulus checks for individuals and workers. There are, of course, others, Ministry of Health, notably. Whichever reintegration effort is to be carried out needs to be to include Ministry of Health because it needs to promote and ensure a safe working environment. Having said that, even if you're talking about a multi-stakeholder undertaking, there must be a leading agency. Across the world, that leading agency is usually corresponds to Employment Services Office, notably Public Employment Services Office, but we need not to be rigid. If that is the case, fine. If not, there are potential alternatives. The second starting point is we need to start with the assessment of the size and complexity of the potential displacement. And this means having an idea of two elements. The headcounts, how many people have been displaced, and their profile. What are their main characteristics? What is their labor market profile, their skills profile, their educational profile, etc., etc. Now, of course, this is a big question. This is something that everybody is striving to assess nowadays. And the first way to do that is through surveys. Not all, but a reasonable number of countries in the Caribbean have restarted to implement household surveys, notably labor force surveys, which will shortly allow to give us at least an estimate of the magnitude of this displacement. Having said that, I wanted to mention that what could also happen is to work on the contents of a number of other surveys which are currently being planned or held across the Caribbean, household surveys which do not necessarily include any question which can allow to assess the labor market situation of the respondents. This is something that could be lobbied for, could be pushed for, and that is not always happening. The first example that comes to mind is health-related surveys, but there might be others. So the message is ensure that whichever household survey is held at present includes at least a couple of questions which would then allow to measure the extent of the displacement of the labor force. The second source of data is administrative data. And now when we're talking about administrative data, we have two very immediate sources of them. One is the job seekers, the people that go and come within the employment services or within any equivalent office. How many are they, and what is their profile? There is likely to have been an increase in the number of those people since the outset of the crisis, and to having some summary measures of who these people are and what their profile is can be helpful. And the second is the data from ongoing stimulus programs. As I said before, NISs or National Insurance Scheme generally coordinate the disbursement of these cash transfers. Having said that, they probably also have some data on who is receiving them, and if not yet, they could have some data about the profile of the people receiving. And the profile could include elements such as what industry they were working in, what was their occupation, what was their educational attainment, etc., etc. If not there, or if there, but not being fully analyzed, the suggestion is to utilize those data, of course, taking into account that this data might be incomplete or even biased because not everybody has access to stimulus packages. So there is a little bit of interpretation to be made. But these two sources, the job seekers who come and visit the employment services, or at least call or at least visit the website, because of course there were quarantine and lockdowns, and the people who have access stimulus programs can be the first and most immediate source of data to have an idea about how many people are jobless and what is their profile. Last but not least, some research might be helpful. Again, we are talking about having an idea of the size, the magnitude of the population that we will need to help. We are going to publish, as I know, a couple of research papers in July, trying to assess to what extent reduction in the number of incoming tourists reflects on employment, and also trying to assess to what extent the overall reduction in gross domestic product affects the employment. This could be something that could provide some ballpark figures to the interested policymakers. Now, before moving to what can be offered to job seekers, something that can be offered to promote reintegration of workers is some services to employers. And we are going to see an example with Giovanni that even in these times, there have been some sectors who have been in need of workers. And employment services across the world have provided some assistance in recruitment, but not only. Some other sectors perhaps tried or attempted to move to repurposing their production. If that is the case, they might need other type of skills, other type of human resources. And even for that, employment services might be of help by bridging the information gap between the company, the employer, the business, and the training available. One micro level thing that could be of interest, one micro level activity. From speaking to countries, we have seen that there have been some barriers in accessing part of the stimulus packages. Barriers in terms of red tape, also in terms of physical distance, non-transport, non-availability of bank accounts, or not fulfillment of certain conditions. For instance, the tax registration numbers, not everybody had it. And we are speaking in particular about small employers, micro and small enterprises. Now, there is some help provided, but by whoever is in charge of disbursing the stimulus packages to these employers. But as an employment services, we are also meant to support employers in general. And the suggestion is to combine that that discussion about helping on how to access some of the stimulus package with the conversation about employment retention to start with, or employment creation. Speaking about what is the each employer labor market, each employment labor force situations, but also sharing information about something else which is available. Not everybody knows about everything that is available, but also about for instance, occupational health and safety, what they need to ensure if there is any return to work. Next slide. Now, moving to services to the jobless population. One note, we are talking about jobless population and not unemployed population. In statistical terms, unemployed need to be actively looking for jobs. What could very well be happening is that people are not actively looking for jobs. They are simply not searching. So the actual number of people who might be interested in a job, it's probably higher than the number of people unemployed. Now, having said that, I'm just going to go quickly over these 5 areas which are typically part of the package that countries implement to facilitate the reintegration of workers in the labor force. Starting with outreach, what has happened in many countries is that employment services have needed to expand their outreach because the number of potential beneficiaries grew, and they were not aware of the services available to them. So perhaps the first thing that we should think of is, do we need to expand the outreach, which doesn't only mean reaching out to a higher number of persons, but also reaching out in a more efficient way. Typically, the shift to online services has been a constant throughout this crisis. And also important to know that the shift to the online services has not entailed shift to machine-led services. There is still an interactive component via Skype, via WhatsApp, via whatever is possible. Job search assistance, typically one of the services offered. Education and career guidance. This is another area, another service which is typically offered, which might need to be at the very least updated. And is it something that is being done? The perspectives of career and educational guidance before COVID are probably not the same. Nobody knows for sure, but for sure there is some need of adaptation of the messages that are being shared with the job seekers, and this is something that needs to be reflected upon. Sharing information, referral, enrollment into support with a number of measures, from training to enterprise and self-employment support, to social services, to public works, to other services, and also to something related to healthcare and occupational health. Now, the point which I want to make here is that as a policy response to COVID, there were a lot of new programs, a lot of new assistance developed. And new public resources were made available. But before the COVID crisis itself, there were a number of other programs, typically for small business development, for self-employment development, or even in other areas, thinking about babysitting, for instance, which were already there and for which people did not know about. So the reference or the enrollment or the facilitation with access should reflect to both these areas. One, the new measures, the post-COVID measures, but also the old ones. And the last point is about financial support. There are a number of stimulus checks, or in two countries in the Caribbean, Barbados and Bahamas, unemployment insurance, which are provided as part of facilitating the reintegration of workers, because we need to understand that we need to understand that the stimulus checks, the income support is meant to provide livelihood and survival and income replace, but it's also meant to provide a temporary source of income so that the job seekers or whoever lost her job can engage actively in job search. This is one of the universal purposes of unemployment insurance, and this is one of the purposes that could be adapted to ongoing income supports. Now, I will go through this very quickly. This is the typical flow of the assistance in terms of reintegration of workers. Employment services, or whoever in charge, provide a range of low intensity services from a large number of individuals, and at step 0. Then at step 1, we shift typically to individualized counseling, sitting one-on-one with the job seeker and advising the job seeker. And then in step 2, if the job seeker has not found any employment, we move to combine this individualized counseling with a range of support measures. Be it training, be it self-employment support, be it subsidized employment, public employment, etc., etc. But this is what has to happen. Of course, what is likely to happen in COVID is that the quantities will increase. So we have a higher number of people accessing each step, which would mean needing to plan adequate resources for each of them. And of course, the higher you go from step 0 to step 2, the higher the individual cost of assistance. And typically though also the less number of people to be accommodated. Next. Now, what are some good practices that we can recommend at this stage? Number 1 is investment in the process itself, in the process of managing the job seekers or the jobless population, in the process of reaching out to them, and investment in the support measures that are available at step 2. Avalon, if we can go back one slide. Step 2, these supportive measures. We need investment in those supportive measures, and for the most part, Caribbean countries have already invested. Next. The second suggestion is about individual plans. It's a simple tool which has proven to be effective. If we provide individual counseling to job seekers, and we design with her an individual plan, the employment outcome it's likely to be better than if we do not have that individual plan. And designing and setting up and following the individual plan it's a small investment with respect to the benefits that could provide. The third recommendation is about monitoring whatever we are doing. I spoke in the previous slide about monitored, tired approach. Whatever we are doing, especially if it is a new measure, especially if we are assisting job seekers that are new to our services, because this is going to be the reality. Some people will be completely new customers of ours. We need to monitor what we are providing them, and more importantly, what is the end result, what is their labor market performance. And this is something which is repeated a lot, but the bottom line is that we need some investment at this stage in order to perform adequate monitoring. We need some investment in whatever it is, whether it's the old style phone call or whether it's a mobile app or whatever it is. This is something that cannot be thought about afterwards. It has to start right now. Next. And the last thing is about what I take the liberty of calling active broker in a role. So whatever we are dealing with and whatever services we are providing, be it sharing information, referral, offer of services, training, self-employment grants, self-employment loans, public works, it's probably helpful, but also most likely not enough, because we have more job seekers, we have more people to cater to, etc., etc. And also we are still in the crisis. Labor demand is weak, jobs do not exist, investments are low, uncertainty rules, and fiscal space is limited. So what can be done? Next slide. This active broker in a role for labor market policy at the end means to play a leading role vis-a-vis some internal stakeholders, meaning governmental stakeholders, in ensuring consistency between measures aimed at supporting labor supply and labor demand and social protection. Now, all countries, virtually all countries, have established an interministerial coordination body for COVID response. This is true, this might be working very well, but what is, if we are to be realistic, what is less likely to happen is that everybody knows about how each measure is actually implemented. At the end of the day, who are the actual beneficiaries, and especially at the technical level. Maybe the ministries, the PSs might know, or because information is shared, but then the technical level, who are the ones who daily deal with the job seekers, they might not know. So playing this active role to ensure consistency, and of course to ensure consistency, the first step is probably gathering information. It's something that should be played and could be recommended. And this is the point: 3, ensure systematic collection. Now, I want to highlight one example of policy coherence, which is the St. Lucia Learning Workforce Recovery Initiative. This is a program that offers free tertiary education to people who have been dismissed, but also free tertiary education which is relevant for priority areas, which have been identified most likely by other ministries, but not even areas, but priority industries. This is the kind of policy coherence we are looking to implement. Now, the other the other benefit of playing an active brokering role is pushing other ministries, other entities, even private entities who might be playing a role in delivering certain services for real-time monitoring. More likely than not, we are implementing some new schemes. We do not want to obtain information about their effectiveness and impact too late. We want to obtain that information as soon as possible, because then that could help to propose needed changes, if any changes need. But again, obtaining this information requires investment, and investment requires somebody to push for it. Last but not least, and no, sorry, Alan, best. Last but not least, I wanted to highlight something that can be done in terms of active brokering toward external stakeholders. We can, again, it's perhaps a micro level intervention, but it's something that employment services might definitely have a role to play in. And it's helping by shaping the supply of the support services. Employment services have the information about the job seekers and have the information about the employers, or at least should have information about those. Who are the ones and what are the needs of the others. And now they can just facilitate the matching between the two. And this is certainly welcome, but they can also take a step forward. They can perhaps envisage to have some market type negotiations for certain elements. Let me give you an example. If a certain employer needs 100 nurses in 6 months, and we can sit down with the employer and negotiate the hiring of those nurses, and we can sit down with the job seekers to convince them to take part in a nursing training, but we can also negotiate with the training providers to provide us a discount if we bring to him or her 100 people to be trained within the next 6 months. So it's not anymore about just matching the demand and supply. It's about actively becoming actively involved, and this applies to a number of potential areas. Now, my last slide, I apologize for being late. It's about few trade-off and pending questions. Whatever we talked about it's not, first of all, it's not easy to implement, but it's also, there are also some trade-offs that are likely to arise. The first one is about who are we supposed to help? We have there is a scientific fact. Whoever is detached from the labor market for most loses employability. It becomes harder and harder the longer you're detached from the labor market to be re-employed. Now, the problem is that at this stage, we are going to have the people who were unemployed or without a job before the COVID crisis and a bunch of new people. And within the new people, we're going to have some of them who are most likely to be more employable, say the ones with the higher education attainment, but also somebody who we might characterize as being at the back of the queue, perhaps youth, perhaps people who were previously in the informal sector. Who should we help first? Of course, we would want to help everybody, but we might not have resources to help everybody at the same time. And the second question is the available support distributed in an equitable way? The stimulus packages provide a number of support to citizens or workers or unemployed workers. Is everybody covered by that support? Do we have to play a role in ensuring that everybody is covered? Thinking about the simple demographics, are, for instance, large families receiving more or less support than single individuals, etc., etc. And of course, the answer, I cannot provide you an answer. This is a political decision, but the bottom line is that if there is a choice to be made, if there is a prioritization to be made, the 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 but well, apologies for the repetition. The bottom line has to be to reflect on what is our primary policy objective. Do we want to re-employ the highest number of people? Do we want to ensure that people do not become idle? Do we want to ensure reduction of inequality, and so by doing so we might choose to help only the most vulnerable? Do we want to avoid depletion of human capital, etc., etc.? And once we have a clear idea about that, the choices, the immediate choices might become easier. And of course, those are not easy choices, but it's some concrete questions that might arise. Last but not least is the issue of should we combine and condition the financial assistance, the stimulus checks, or even the unemployment insurance payments, which two countries in the Caribbean issue, with other support to job seekers? And in particular, combining, I think it's a given. I mean, nobody wants to reduce or limit the options available to job seekers unless there is some sort of prioritization to be made. But conditioning, it's another matter. Should we require job seekers to attend training, to attend job search, to actively engage into job search as a condition to obtain cash transfer? The answer cannot be dogmatic. It is a possibility under ILO Convention 168 if certain conditions arise, if actually other services can be provided. But the bottom line is we want to do whatever is necessary to ensure decent, productive, and freely chosen employment. I'll stop here with this broader in scope, perhaps, question. I will give the floor to Giovanni, who will provide us with some examples.
Thank you, Diego. So yeah, during the crisis, we have seen several trends emerging and countries implementing measures to respond to them. A first kind of measures that we saw in this period were those aiming in facilitating the rapid recruitment of workers in essential sectors. In fact, although economic activity worldwide has been largely limited, a number of sectors, especially those considered vital during the confinement, such as the health sector or the ICT sector, the agricultural sector, this sector continued recruiting and saw a large increase in labor demand. Just to give an example, the Paraguayan Employment Services reported to us that for the first time, the number of job vacancies registered in their portals were higher than the number of job applicants. In order to respond rapidly to this challenge, government and especially employment services adopted a series of measures. In some countries, like in France or in Luxembourg, new web portals were launched in order to redirect unemployed or workers in short time to temporary jobs in sectors in need of workforce. In other countries instead, such as Finland or Bulgaria, some exemptions were granted to the recipients of unemployment benefits in order to allow them to work while maintaining the benefit. A second important challenge that countries had to deal with was to provide income support to people losing their jobs. And here, countries mainly relied on unemployment benefits and social protection mechanisms. In this sense, we saw a tendency in relaxing requirements for recipients. For example, in France, but also in the Mauritius, job search controls and sanctions were removed. And a similar situation happened also in Australia. Special attention was given to workers that were not covered by these mechanisms, such as self-employed or informal workers. And this has been done either by establishing new funds, like in the Barbados, in the Bahamas, where a new unemployment fund targeting self-employed in the touristic sector was created. Or another way country operated was by extending the coverage of already existing mechanisms, like in Chile, where the Programa de Ingreso Único Familiar was modified in order to provide informal workers with 3 months with a 3 months cash transfers. Next slide, please. Could you switch? Okay, thank you. So policy intervention have also been associated to some kind of training-related mechanisms in order to maintain labor market attachments of job seekers and to enhance employability. In this sense, some countries launched again new portals. France and Brazil, for example, implemented new web portals to allow job seekers to access online trainings and professional qualification courses. Other countries instead reinforced support for specific groups. For example, Australia allocated additional funds for job seekers over 45 in order to increase access to training, job search support, and improving digital literacy. In Singapore, instead, a new grant was established, the so-called COVID support grant. And this grant was targeting low and middle income unemployed. The program in general provide a 3 months cash transfer, and it is directly linked with job search support and vocational training. Similarly, also in the government of South Korea announced the so-called job search promotion subsidy for people that were laid off because of COVID, and in particular for people in low-income households and young and old workers. According to this program, this subsidy, unemployed are entitled to special allocations in order to cover their living expenses, and at the same time they receive training and support from the employment services. So in general, I would say that it is very important during moment of crisis to proceed to an upskill and a reskill of unemployed, also to sort of construct the fundamentals, the basis for future employment. Thank you.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you, Giovanni. While we were having these presentations, we received some questions and comments. First, let us deal with the point of a clarification on a phrase. Diego, could you explain the babysitting support? Oh, excuse me, Diego, by the way. Just like other roundtables, the presentations will be made available on the ILO's website, so you can have an access to it after each session. Sorry, Diego, could you explain the babysitting support?
Right. Well, that's what that refers to two things. One is in Italy is the first example I can think of. It was realized that in order to allow people to re-access their workplace with the schools closed, they had to ensure babysitting was available, and so limited number of families fulfilling certain criteria obtain some vouchers that could be used to hire external babysitters, but interesting, it can also be used to hire members of the family. So that was part of what I was referring to. Leaving that aside, this is a COVID-specific measure which was introduced very recently, actually. But there might be some other supports available pre-COVID for parents, notably single parents, and the job seekers might not fully know about them. That's the bottom line. So if the employment services of whoever is in charge of assisting job seekers for reintegrating the labor force can share the information, can facilitate the access to those services, that can be helpful in turn to actually access employment.
Okay, thank you, Diego. Then the next question. What will be the role of trade unions in all this, in the labor market policy, in the new normal?
Right. Well, number one, thanks for the question. We want to salute the trade unionists and the employers, members of the employers organizations who attend our webinars. The role of the trade unions is, I would say, it's threefold. One is trade unions can facilitate the exchange of information. They probably have a hands-on view of who are the people who were laid off and what is their profile. And they can exchange that information with employment services or whoever else is in charge of support measures, be it training, be it self-employment, subsidies, etc., etc. The second thing is trade unions have a role in terms of guaranteeing quality of employment. We do not want to simply reintegrate people in the labor market. We want to reintegrate them, guaranteeing decent working conditions. And so it's not any job which should be promoted by employment services, but it's jobs who are decent and which guarantee decent working conditions. And trade unions might have a monitoring role to play. And as a corollary of that, it's possible that trade unions might actually be engaged in negotiating firm-specific, I would say, agreements for the new job seekers, exchanging. Maybe not exchanging is not the best word, but at least starting a dialogue about what would be needed from employer in exchange for hiring people? Is there anything that trade unions can contribute with? So it's about being actively engaged in social dialogue and collective bargaining, but perhaps more than at the country level or industry level, at the firm level.
And I assume they can also be engaged in shaping new labor market policies, no? In consultative forums.
Well, they may know where the technology is going. The workers themselves may know, say, where the technology is going, so they may help shape the suitable training courses. There might be some specific expertise that could be valued.
Oh, okay, thank you. And also, we have received not question, but rather comments on an initiative. There is a participant who's working on a project to establish a center for career development, also a worker preparation trainings center. And would you, Diego or Giovanni, would you like to comment on this?
Well, I think the best, even because it's a bit late, is if we get in touch directly. The bottom line is that there is a lot going on across the Caribbean countries, but not everybody is aware that the mapping of the initiative is still weak. And the sharing of the information between institutional stakeholders and between institutional stakeholders and job seekers and employers is also weak. And that's certainly an area that can be improved. But I invite Ms. Mazzino to get in touch directly with me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, colleagues. So these are all the questions and comments received on part 2. And with that, I would like to thank you, dear participants, for your interest and active participation at today's roundtable. And also the two colleagues, I would like to extend a special appreciation to 2 colleagues from ILO headquarters who joined us across oceans and time difference. Naj and Giovanni, thank you. The next session on the virtual roundtable is scheduled on the 9th of July. We will of course update with details when the date nears. So with that, I would like to thank you, and especially because the session got longer. But I hope you would agree that it was for the good cause, and